I trusted my husband until his funeral, when a single message made me fear my own family. The casket hadn't even been closed when my phone buzzed with a text meant for someone else. In that moment, 43 years of marriage shattered like glass under my feet. You know, I'm sharing this because I wish someone had warned me before it was too late. If this story touches your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe. There might be someone out there who needs to hear this before they make the same mistakes I did. I stood there in my black dress, the one Richard had always said made me look dignified, surrounded by lilies he would have hated. He preferred roses. But nobody asked me about the flowers. They just appeared, ordered by my daughter-in-law Jennifer, who said she was taking care of everything so I wouldn't have to worry. The funeral home in downtown Chicago smelled like furniture polish and synthetic lavender. My hands shook as I clutched my phone, reading words that weren't meant for my eyes. "Don't worry, she won't know until after probate. The lawyer said we're clear as long as she signs before reading the fine print." The message was from my son David to Jennifer. They didn't know I'd been added to their family text thread by accident when my grandson was playing with phones at Thanksgiving. Nobody noticed the little gray checkmark next to Grandma Rose. I looked up at Richard's face, peaceful in death, more peaceful than he'd been in months. The cancer had eaten him from the inside, but he'd fought until the very end, making calls from his hospital bed, meeting with lawyers when he could barely sit up. I'd thought he was just being thorough, making sure I'd be taken care of. Now I understood he'd been fighting something else entirely. My sister Claire touched my elbow. "Rose, honey, you need to sit down. You look pale." I couldn't sit. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, but I couldn't sit. Around me, people who'd supposedly loved Richard for decades picked at sandwich trays and spoke in hushed voices about what a good man he'd been. My daughter Melissa stood by the guest book, her designer purse probably worth more than my monthly grocery budget, checking her watch every few minutes. My youngest, Thomas, hadn't even bothered to fly in from Los Angeles until this morning. He'd missed his father's last words, but he'd made it in time for the will reading scheduled for tomorrow. Tomorrow. When I was supposed to sign papers, I hadn't been given time to review. The weight of Richard's wedding ring hung on a chain around my neck. I'd slipped it off his finger myself just an hour ago, when the funeral director wasn't looking. 43 years. We'd met at a summer dance in 1981, when I was still teaching second grade, and he was a young architect with dreams bigger than his bank account. He'd spun me around that dance floor like we were the only two people alive. We'd built a life together, 3 children, 2 houses, 1 vacation cabin in Wisconsin that the kids had always loved. Or so I'd thought they loved it. I'd spent decades believing in the sanctity of family above all else. My mother raised me that way. You don't air dirty laundry. You don't question your children's motives. You trust that the love you poured into them would be returned when you needed it most. The text message burned in my pocket like a live coal. Richard had been diagnosed 18 months ago. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the doctor said, looking at us with those pitying eyes that doctors practice in medical school. 6 months, maybe 8 with treatment. Richard made it to 16, stubborn until the end. During those months, I'd watched our savings drain away despite the insurance. The experimental treatments he'd wanted to try, the holistic center in Arizona that Jennifer had recommended, the special diet Thomas had read about online that required organic ingredients I had to order from California. It all cost money. Money I'd handed over without question because they said it would help him. I'd cashed in my teacher's pension early, taken a second mortgage on the house Richard and I had paid off years ago, sold my mother's jewelry, piece by piece, at a consignment shop on Michigan Avenue where the owner knew better than to ask questions. And they'd let me. "Mom, you should really let us handle the finances," Melissa had said one afternoon, sitting at my kitchen table with her tablet and her concerned face. You're under so much stress. David's good with money. Let him take over the accounts so you can focus on Dad." I'd been grateful. I'd signed papers she'd slid across the table, barely reading them through my tears. "Power of attorney for financial decisions," she'd said. "Just temporary, just while Dad was sick, just to make things easier." Now Richard was in a casket, and I was standing in a funeral home, realizing that easier had meant easier for them. The viewing ended at 8. People filtered out, offering condolences that felt hollow now. "Call if you need anything," they said. "We're here for you," they promised. Empty words from people who'd already moved on, who'd be sleeping in their own beds tonight while I went home to a house that echoed. David approached me as I gathered my coat. He was 41 now, with gray threading through his dark hair, looking more and more like Richard every year. It made my heart ache. "Mom, Jennifer and I will follow you home. Make sure you get there safe." "I can drive myself." "Mom, you shouldn't be alone tonight." His voice carried that edge of patience wearing thin, the tone he used when his kids weren't listening fast enough. "I've been driving for 45 years, David. It's not about the driving, it's about—" He stopped, glanced at Jennifer, who was watching us with sharp eyes. "We just want to help." Help. That word again. I thought about all the ways they'd helped over the past year. Melissa helping by taking over my checkbook, temporarily. Thomas helping by recommending financial advisors who charged consultation fees I couldn't afford. David helping by suggesting I sell the cabin because it's just sitting there, Mom, and you need liquid assets. The cabin where we'd spent every summer, where the kids had learned to fish and swim, where Richard had proposed expansion plans the summer before he got sick. The cabin that was now listed with a realtor, sale pending, according to a letter I'd found buried in a stack of mail last week. "I'll be fine," I told David. "I need to be alone tonight." Jennifer stepped forward, her perfume overwhelming. "Rose, we're family. We take care of each other." I looked at her. Really looked at her. She'd married David 15 years ago, a whirlwind romance that Richard had reservations about. "She's ambitious," he'd said. "Nothing wrong with ambition, but watch out for where she directs it." I'd chided him for being judgmental. Jennifer had been nothing but sweet to me, always remembering my birthday, always bringing homemade banana bread when she visited, always offering to take me shopping or to lunch, always positioning herself as the dutiful daughter-in-law while systematically dismantling my financial security. "Family," I repeated. The word tasted like ashes. "Yes, we'll talk tomorrow, after the will reading." Something flickered in Jennifer's eyes. Just for a moment, but I saw it. Panic, maybe. Or calculation. She recovered quickly, smiled, squeezed my hand. "Of course. We'll all be there. Together." I drove home alone through Chicago's streets, past the Lake Michigan shoreline where the water was black and choppy under the winter sky. The house was dark when I arrived. I'd left lights on this morning. I always left lights on. But someone had turned them off. Saving electricity, probably. Saving my money, more accurately. Saving what they thought was their money. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Richard's reading glasses on the side table, his coffee mug, still half full, that I couldn't bring myself to wash. The indent in his chair where he'd sat night after night, getting thinner and quieter, working on his laptop with an intensity that had seemed strange at the time. I went to his study. The laptop was gone. David had taken it weeks ago. Said he needed to handle some of Dad's business emails. The filing cabinet was locked, but I knew where Richard kept the key. He'd shown me once, years ago, pressed it into my palm and said, "If anything happens to me, everything you need is in the black folder." The black folder was gone. I sat in Richard's chair and felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart. That was already broken. This was something deeper, something fundamental. It was the sound of trust shattering, of illusions crumbling, of a woman who'd spent 68 years believing in the goodness of people waking up to a harsher reality. The house settled around me. Upstairs in our bedroom, Richard's side of the bed was still unmade from the last morning he'd slept there, 3 weeks ago, before the final hospital stay. I hadn't washed the sheets. They still smelled like him, like his soap and his skin and his slow, painful dying. I pulled out my phone and read the text message again. "Don't worry, she won't know until after probate. The lawyer said we're clear as long as she signs before reading the fine print." Probate, the legal process of distributing Richard's estate. An estate I'd assumed was straightforward. The house, the cabin, his pension, his life insurance, our joint savings. Everything split or transferred to me as his widow, then eventually to the kids when I died. That's what I'd thought. That's what any reasonable person would think after 43 years of marriage. But I'd signed papers. Papers I hadn't read carefully enough, when grief and stress had made me stupid and trusting. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on for tea. My hands moved automatically, pulling down the tin of Earl Grey, the honey pot, my favorite cup with the hand-painted violets. Richard had bought me that cup on our 20th anniversary, from a little shop in Galena during a weekend getaway. "For the woman who sweetens my life," the card had said. The water boiled. I poured it over the tea bag and watched the color bloom through the clear water, turning it amber. But when I lifted the cup to my lips, I couldn't drink. The smell made my stomach turn. I set it down on the counter, still steaming, and watched it sit there growing cold. Outside, car headlights swept across the living room window. David and Jennifer, probably, checking to make sure I'd made it home. Making sure I was alone and vulnerable and ready to sign whatever they put in front of me tomorrow. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the darkness, waiting for them to leave. They idled at the curb for 10 minutes before driving away. I'd been a second-grade teacher for 37 years. I'd taught hundreds of children to read, to write, to do basic arithmetic. I'd helped them navigate playground conflicts and family troubles and learning disabilities. I'd attended their graduations and weddings, watched them grow into adults with their own children. I'd been good at my job. Patient. Observant. Good at seeing what wasn't being said, reading the signs of trouble beneath the surface. And yet I'd missed every sign in my own family. Or maybe I hadn't missed them. Maybe I'd seen them and chosen to look away, because acknowledging them would mean admitting my children weren't who I'd thought they were. I thought about Melissa's sudden interest in my finances after Richard's diagnosis, how she'd shown up with a financial planner, insisted I needed professional help managing everything. The planner had been smooth, professional, full of terms I didn't understand. Portfolio diversification, liquidity optimization, asset protection strategies. I'd signed documents in his office, trusting that my daughter wouldn't lead me astray. The office had been in a high-rise downtown, all glass and chrome and leather furniture that squeaked when you shifted your weight. I remember feeling small in that big chair, overwhelmed by charts and graphs Melissa's financial planner kept pointing to with a laser pointer. Red lines declining, blue lines ascending, percentages that blurred together. "Your current situation is unsustainable," he'd said, his voice grave but somehow also soothing. "Without proper restructuring, you could lose everything." I'd looked at Melissa then, my daughter who I'd rocked to sleep every night for years, who I'd driven to piano lessons and soccer practice, who I'd helped through her divorce and career changes. She'd nodded encouragingly. "It's complicated, Mom, but Mr. Henderson knows what he's doing. We just need to protect the family assets." Family assets. as if what Richard and I had built through decades of work was somehow communal property they had a right to manage. I'd signed. My hand had trembled, and Melissa had steadied it, her fingers warm over mine. "It's okay, Mom. This is the right thing." She'd smiled that smile I'd seen 1,000 times, the one I'd trusted since she was born, and I'd believed her. I thought about Thomas calling from Los Angeles, always needing money. His startup was almost profitable, he said. His investment was about to pay off, he said. "Just a bridge loan, Mom. I'll pay you back with interest. 20,000 here, 30,000 there." Money that evaporated into the California sunshine, never to return. The first time he'd asked, it was for 15,000. "Mom, I'm so close to a breakthrough. This AI company I'm developing, investors are circling. I just need capital to finish the prototype." He'd sent me pictures of his office space, a converted warehouse in Venice Beach with exposed brick and inspirational posters. It had looked legitimate, professional. 2 months later, "Mom, the investors need to see more user engagement before they'll commit. Just another 20,000 for marketing. I'll pay you back as soon as the funding round closes." His voice had been tight with stress. "Please, Mom, I can't let this opportunity slip away." Dad would understand. He always believed in taking calculated risks. That had stung. Invoking Richard, knowing I'd do anything to honor his memory, his belief in our children. The money went. The startup didn't materialize. When I'd asked about repayment, Thomas had gotten defensive. "Do you know how stressful it is to build a company?" "I'm drowning here, Mom. I thought you supported me." I'd dropped it. Because that's what I did. I dropped things to keep the peace. I thought about David taking over the mortgage payments, insisting it was easier if everything came out of one account. "You'll still own the house, Mom. We're just streamlining the finances." His name on the deed, just for legal purposes. Jennifer's name, too, just to be safe. The conversation had happened in my living room, with Richard upstairs in bed, too weak to come down. David had brought paperwork, spread it across the coffee table like he was dealing cards. "Look, Mom, with Dad's medical expenses, you're bleeding money. If you default on the mortgage, you lose everything. Let me refinance under my credit. My score is better, I'll get a lower interest rate. It saves you money." "But why does your name need to be on the deed?" I'd asked. "Legal requirement for the refinancing. It's just paperwork, Mom. Technical stuff. You're still the owner. This just protects you if something happens and you can't make payments." Jennifer had been there too, nodding along, offering me coffee and those homemade cookies she knew I loved. Creating an atmosphere of warmth and family and trust while they systematically stripped away my ownership of my own home. They'd been planning this. While Richard fought cancer, while I held his hand through chemo and radiation and midnight panic attacks, while I promised him everything would be okay, our children had been preparing to strip me of everything we'd built together. The tea sat on the counter, cold now, a skin forming on top. I poured it down the sink and washed the cup carefully, dried it, put it back in the cabinet. Tomorrow I'd make tea again. Tomorrow I'd pretend everything was normal until I understood exactly what they'd done and how to undo it. Because Richard hadn't spent his final months working frantically on his laptop just to leave me defenseless. He'd known something was wrong. He'd tried to protect me, and that black folder, wherever it had gone, contained something they didn't want me to see. I went upstairs to bed, lay down on my side of the mattress, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in this house, Richard had left me answers. I just had to find them before tomorrow's will reading, before they put more papers in front of me, before I signed away whatever was left. Sleep didn't come. At 3 a.m, I got up and began searching. I'd sacrificed everything for family. My career advancement, I'd turned down a principal position because it would have meant longer hours away from home. My friendships, how many lunch invitations had I declined because the kids needed something? My hobbies, the painting classes I'd loved, the book club I'd been part of, the volunteer work at the library. all set aside because family came first. Richard and I had talked about retirement. We'd planned trips to Ireland and Greece, places we'd never been. We'd talked about downsizing to a condo on the lake, spending winters in Florida. We'd talked about spoiling grandchildren and teaching them to fish at the cabin. I'd had dreams once. I'd wanted to write children's books, illustrate them myself. I had a drawer full of manuscripts and sketches, stories I'd been telling myself I'd finish when I had time. But there was never time. There were always children to raise, meals to cook, a house to maintain, a husband to support in his career while I stayed in the same teaching position year after year because it was stable and the schedule worked for family life. I'd poured my soul into being a wife and mother, believing that was the highest calling, believing the love would be returned, the sacrifices appreciated, the loyalty respected. Standing in Richard's study at 4 a.m, searching through drawers for something, anything, that would explain what they'd done, I finally let myself feel the weight of those lost decades. The anger came then. Not hot and explosive, but cold and steady. It settled into my bones like ice water, clarifying everything. I'd been a fool, a willing, loving, dedicated fool. And tomorrow I was going to find out exactly how much my foolishness had cost me. The dawn came slowly, gray light creeping through the windows. I made coffee, forced myself to drink it. Made toast, forced myself to eat. Showered, dressed in clothes that felt foreign on my body. The funeral had been yesterday, but it felt like years ago. I was a different woman now than the one who'd stood by Richard's casket. At 9 o'clock, my phone rang. Melissa. Mom, are you ready? David and I are coming to pick you up. The meeting's at 10. I can drive myself. Mom, you shouldn't. I'm driving myself, Melissa. I'll meet you there. A pause. Are you okay? I'm fine. You don't sound fine. You sound. I said I'm fine. I'll see you at the lawyer's office. I hung up before she could argue further. The law office was in the Loop, in one of those glass towers that made me feel small and out of place. Richard and I had met with this lawyer, Martin Sheffield, 3 years ago to draft our wills. Basic stuff, I'd thought. Everything to the surviving spouse, then divided among the children after we were both gone. But I'd signed other papers since then, papers I hadn't read carefully enough. The receptionist directed me to a conference room where my children were already seated. David in his suit, looking like a young executive. Melissa in a navy dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Thomas in casual clothes, unshaven, like he couldn't be bothered to dress up for his father's will reading. Jennifer was there too, sitting next to David like she had every right. Mrs. Patterson. Martin Sheffield stood, extended his hand. He was younger than I expected, maybe 50, with kind eyes that I didn't trust. My condolences on your loss. Richard was a good man. Yes, he was. We all sat. Martin pulled out a folder, not black, disappointingly, and began the formal reading. Most of it was standard. The house, the cabin, the cars, all joint property, now solely in my name. Richard's pension, his life insurance, his retirement accounts, all beneficiary designated to me. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt dread. Martin cleared his throat. Now, there are some assets that were transferred into a family trust approximately 8 months ago. Richard established this trust with the intention of protecting certain investments and ensuring smooth transition of assets to the next generation. What trust? The words came out sharper than I intended. Martin looked uncomfortable. The Patterson Family Trust. You're listed as a beneficiary, of course, but the assets are held in trust with David, Melissa, and Thomas as co-trustees. This was established in June of last year. You signed the documents. I don't remember signing anything about a trust. Mom, you were really stressed, Melissa said softly. We went over everything with you. The lawyer explained it all. Different lawyer? David added. Estate planning specialist, remember? At his office downtown? I did remember. Vaguely. A day when Richard had been in the hospital, when I'd been awake for 36 hours straight. When Melissa had picked me up and driven me to an office where a man in an expensive suit had explained things I was too exhausted to absorb. What assets are in this trust? Martin consulted his papers. The Wisconsin cabin property, the investment portfolio Richard maintained, approximately $800,000 in various stocks and bonds. And there appears to have been a transfer of funds from your joint savings account, roughly $240,000. The room tilted. That's over $1 million. The trust assets are for your benefit, Mrs. Patterson, Martin said quickly. The trustees are obligated to manage them in your best interest and provide distributions as needed for your care and support. So I don't actually control my own money. You're a beneficiary, but I don't control it. I looked at my children. All three avoided my eyes. You put my money in a trust that you control? Mom, it's for your protection, Thomas said. Estate planning? Tax advantages. It's smart financial management. It's my money. It's family money, Jennifer said. Her voice was gentle, but there was steel underneath. This is what wealthy families do. They protect their assets across generations. Wealthy families. I almost laughed. Richard and I were teachers and architects. We saved carefully. We lived modestly. We built something through hard work. And now you've taken it and put it somewhere I can't reach it. That's not how trusts work, David started. Then explain to me exactly how they work. Explain why you needed to put my husband's life insurance and pension in my name, but everything else in a trust you control. Explain why you did this while he was dying, while I was too grief-stricken to think straight. Mrs. Patterson, Martin interjected, I understand this is overwhelming. Perhaps we should take a break. What else? I turned back to him. What other surprises are in that folder? He hesitated. That told me everything. The house, he said finally. The mortgage was refinanced 8 months ago. The new loan is in David's name, with you as co-borrower. The title was transferred to a limited liability company, Patterson Properties LLC. You're listed as a member, but David is the managing member. I don't own my own house. You own a share of the LLC that owns the house, which David controls. As managing member, yes, he has certain authorities. I stood up. My legs were steadier than they'd been at the funeral. I need copies of every document I signed in the last year. Every single one. Mom, you're being paranoid. I need them today. Martin nodded slowly. I'll have my secretary pull everything from our files, but some documents were handled by other attorneys. I can provide what we have. Then provide it. I walked out of the conference room, down the hall, into the elevator. My children called after me, but I didn't stop, didn't look back. In the parking garage, sitting in my car with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I finally let myself admit the truth. My family had robbed me. Not with guns or masks, but with papers and signatures and my own stupid trust. They'd waited until I was at my weakest, my most vulnerable. And they'd taken everything Richard and I had built. And they'd done it in plain sight, with smiles and concerned voices and claims of protection. My phone buzzed. Text from Melissa. Mom, please don't be upset. We were trying to help. Call me. Another text from David. We need to talk. You're not understanding how this works. Another from Thomas. This is crazy. We're your kids. We love you. I turned off my phone. For 43 years, I'd believed in the sanctity of family. I'd believed that the love you gave would be returned. I'd believed that if you sacrificed enough, worked hard enough, gave enough, your children would take care of you when you were old. I'd been wrong about everything. But there was one thing I knew. Richard had known. He'd spent his final months fighting this somehow, leaving me breadcrumbs. That black folder existed somewhere, and it contained whatever he'd been working on. I just had to find it before they realized I was looking. I drove home, locked the doors, and began tearing the house apart systematically. Every drawer, every closet, every possible hiding place. Richard had been clever. He'd known they were watching. Where would he hide something he wanted me to find, but they wouldn't? The search consumed me. I started with the obvious places: the study, the bedroom, the garage. Nothing. Then I moved to less likely spots. The attic, dusty and hot even in winter. The basement, cold and damp. The kitchen cabinets, behind stacks of dishes and forgotten serving platters. Hours passed. The house became a disaster zone, belongings strewn everywhere like a hurricane had torn through. I was methodical, checking every book for hidden papers, every picture frame for false backs, every piece of furniture for secret compartments. By evening, I'd found nothing. The house was chaos, my belongings scattered everywhere, and I was no closer to answers. I sat on the floor of Richard's study, surrounded by empty drawers, and pulled out files, and let myself cry for the first time since he'd died. Not for Richard. He was at peace now. For myself. For the fool I'd been. For the woman who'd trusted when she should have questioned, who'd signed when she should have read, who'd believed when she should have verified. The doorbell rang. I ignored it. It rang again. And again. "Mom? I know you're in there." Melissa's voice muffled through the door. "Please, we need to talk." I stayed silent on the floor. "Mrs. Patterson?" A different voice. Male, authoritative. "This is Officer Chen with the Chicago Police Department. Your children called us. They're concerned about your welfare." I hauled myself up, checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. Red eyes. Gray hair disheveled. Clothes wrinkled. I looked like exactly what I was. A woman falling apart. I opened the door. Officer Chen was young, Asian, with kind eyes that reminded me of former students. Behind him stood all three of my children, their faces masks of concern. "Mrs. Patterson, are you all right? Your children said you were having some kind of crisis. They're worried you might hurt yourself." "I'm not going to hurt myself." "She's not herself," Jennifer said from behind David. "She's been acting strange since the funeral. Paranoid. Confused. We're worried about her mental state. I'm right here. You can speak directly to me." "Mom, please." Melissa's eyes were wet. "We love you. We're trying to help. This isn't about the money. This is exactly about the money. And I'm not confused or paranoid. I'm angry. There's a difference." "Ma'am," Officer Chen said gently, "your children have legal authority to act on your behalf if you're incapacitated. They're concerned." "I'm not incapacitated. I'm grieving and angry, but I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions." "She's clearly not," David said. "Look at her. Look at the house." He gestured past me to the chaos visible through the doorway. "This isn't normal behavior." Officer Chen looked at me carefully. "Are you taking any medications, ma'am? When was the last time you ate?" "I'm fine. I'm just looking for something." "What are you looking for?" I almost told him. Almost said. "The documents my husband left me. The ones that will prove my children are thieves." But I stopped myself. Because David was right about one thing, I looked crazy. A 68-year-old widow in a trashed house, making accusations against her own children with no proof. Who would they believe? "Papers," I said finally. "Personal papers. And I'd appreciate if my family would respect my privacy while I grieve." "Mom, we're worried about you being alone." "I want to be alone." Officer Chen looked between us. "Mrs. Patterson, I can't force you to accept help, but I'd encourage you to talk to someone. A therapist, maybe. Grief counseling. Your children clearly care about you." "Yes, sir," I said. "I'm sure they do." After they left, After more arguments and pleas and thinly veiled threats about mental competency, I locked the door and leaned against it, shaking. They were closing in. They'd used the police to check on me, to create a record of my strange behavior. Building a case for incompetency, probably. Getting ready to take complete control. I had to find Richard's folder. I had to find it tonight. I went back to the study and forced myself to think like Richard. Logical, careful Richard. He'd hidden something in plain sight. Somewhere they wouldn't think to look because they didn't know him the way I did. And then it hit me. The morning of Richard's final hospital stay, he'd asked me to bring him something from home. The photo album, he'd said. The one from our honeymoon. I want to look at it. I'd brought it to him. He'd page through it slowly, running his fingers over pictures of us young and happy in Rome. Remember this? He'd kept saying. Remember how beautiful it all was? He'd kept that album with him until the end. I'd brought it home from the hospital with his other belongings, set it on the shelf in our bedroom with the other albums. I ran upstairs. The album was where I'd left it. I pulled it down, opened it carefully, and there, slipped between pages of memories, were documents. Printouts of bank statements showing transfers I'd never authorized. Copies of trust documents with signatures that looked like mine but with dates I couldn't remember. Emails between David and Jennifer discussing their inheritance while Richard was still alive. Text messages about the cabin sale. A handwritten letter from Richard, his writing shaky but determined. Rose, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've figured out what they're doing. I tried to stop it. I contacted a lawyer, Rachel Chen. Her card is with these papers. She specializes in financial elder abuse. I documented everything I could before I got too sick. The trust is potentially reversible. You signed under duress and without proper legal counsel. The house transfer might be fraudulent. I'm sorry I didn't protect you better. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. But you're stronger than they think. Fight them. Don't let them take what we built. I love you. I've always loved you, Richard. I sat on the bedroom floor holding my dead husband's letter and felt something shift inside me. Not breaking. I was already broken. This was something else. Something harder. Something sharp enough to cut. They'd underestimated me. They thought I was just a silly old woman, too trusting to fight back, too weak to stand up for myself. They thought grief had made me helpless. They were wrong. I pulled out the business card tucked with the documents. Rachel Chen, attorney at law, elder law and financial protection. At 9 o'clock at night, I called the emergency number on the card. Chen Law, a woman's voice answered. This is Rachel. My name is Rose Patterson. My husband Richard contacted you before he died. A pause. Mrs. Patterson. Yes, I'm so sorry for your loss. Richard was a remarkable man. He fought very hard to protect you. I found his documents. Good. That's very good. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? We have a lot to discuss. They're trying to have me declared incompetent. Of course they are. That's standard for this type of situation. Mrs. Patterson, what they've done is illegal. Trust fraud, undue influence, possible forgery. But we need to move quickly. Can you keep the documents safe tonight? Yes. Don't let anyone in your house. Don't sign anything else. Don't agree to any medical evaluations. And Mrs. Patterson, this is going to get ugly. They're not going to let go easily. I know. Good. I'll see you at 9 tomorrow morning. My office is on West Madison Street. I spent that night on my bedroom floor, surrounded by Richard's evidence, reading every page until I understood exactly what had been done to me. How they'd layered the fraud, each step seemingly innocent, but building toward total control of my assets. How they'd timed it perfectly, waiting until Richard was too sick to interfere effectively, but not so sick that I'd question their sudden involvement. It was brilliant, really. Evil, but brilliant. By morning, I had a plan. Rachel Chen was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an efficient manner. Her office was modest but professional. She sat across from me and listened to everything: the funeral, the text message, the will reading, the police visit. "They're scared," she said when I finished. "The text message tipped you off early. They expected to have more time to secure everything before you understood what had happened. Can I get it back? The money? The house? The cabin?" "Most of it, probably. The trust is clearly invalid. You signed under duress without proper legal representation. The house transfer is potentially fraudulent. Some of the liquid assets they've already spent might be harder to recover, but we can pursue them legally for restitution." "How long will this take?" "Months. Maybe longer if they fight hard. And Mrs. Patterson, they will fight. This isn't going to be pleasant." "I don't care about pleasant. I care about justice." She smiled. "Then let's begin." The first step was getting a temporary restraining order preventing them from accessing any remaining joint accounts or making any further property transfers. Rachel filed the paperwork that afternoon. By evening, David's bank accounts were frozen. By the next morning, the cabin sale had been halted. My phone exploded with messages I didn't answer. The second step was gathering evidence. Rachel hired a forensic accountant to trace every dollar. She hired a handwriting expert to examine my signatures on disputed documents. She subpoenaed email records and phone records and bank records. The third step was filing criminal complaints. Not civil lawsuits, criminal charges for elder financial abuse, fraud, and forgery. That's when they really started fighting. David showed up at my door with a court order for a mental competency evaluation. I showed him the restraining order Rachel had filed. Melissa called crying, begging me to drop the charges. "We're family, Mom. You're destroying the family." "You destroyed it first," I told her. "You just didn't think I'd notice." Thomas sent increasingly hostile texts about how I was being manipulated by lawyers who just wanted my money. The irony was almost funny. Jennifer showed up at my house at 2 a.m, pounding on the door, screaming about how I'd ruined their lives. I called the police. She was arrested for violating the restraining order. And through it all, I felt nothing but cold clarity. I'd spent 68 years being nice, being accommodating, being the loving mother who put everyone else first. I'd swallowed my anger, dismissed my doubts, sacrificed my dreams, all in service of family harmony. I was done with harmony. Rachel was right. It got ugly. The media picked up the story. Chicago widow accuses children of elder abuse. My grandchildren, caught in the middle, suffered. Friends took sides. The church community whispered. I didn't care. Because here's what I learned. People who love you don't rob you. They don't forge signatures and manipulate legal documents and exploit your grief for financial gain. They don't gaslight you when you catch them. They don't try to have you declared incompetent when you fight back. My children didn't love me. They loved what I represented: financial security, inheritance, property they considered theirs by right of birth. The forensic accountant found everything. Over the course of Richard's illness, they'd siphoned off approximately $400,000 through various means. The trust fraud, the house refinancing, the cabin sale, loans to Thomas that were never meant to be repaid, investments that Melissa had pocketed, management fees that David had charged to the trust he'd created, $400,000 they'd stolen while I held my dying husband's hand. The district attorney was interested. Very interested. Financial elder abuse with amounts this high could mean serious jail time. My children lawyered up. Their attorneys filed motions to dismiss, claiming I'd been a willing participant in all transactions. They produced documents with my signature. They testified to my mental state, my stress, my inability to manage complex financial matters. Rachel tore them apart. The handwriting expert testified that several signatures were forged or traced. The forensic accountant showed the patterns of fraud. Rachel presented Richard's documentation, showing his attempts to stop them. She brought in experts on elder abuse who explained how predatory family members operate, and I testified. I sat in that witness stand and told the truth about everything. My blind trust, my sacrifices, my slow realization of betrayal. I looked at my children across the courtroom and felt nothing but pity for what they'd become. The judge ruled in my favor on the civil case. The trust was dissolved. The house transferred back to my sole ownership. The cabin sale was voided and the property returned. David, Melissa, and Thomas were ordered to repay the stolen funds with interest and penalties. Total, nearly $600,000. The criminal case was ongoing. The DA was pushing for jail time. Their attorneys were negotiating pleas. I didn't care anymore what happened to them. They'd stopped being my children the moment they decided I was just an asset to be exploited. 6 months after Richard's funeral, I stood in our house, my house now, truly mine, and packed a suitcase. Rachel had helped me establish real estate planning, legitimate estate planning this time. The house was in a trust that only I controlled. My will was clear and ironclad. If I died tomorrow, everything would go to charity, not to my children. I'd sold the cabin. Too many tainted memories. The buyer was a young family who promised to take care of it. I hoped their children would be better than mine. With the proceeds from that sale and the settlement money I'd recovered, I was financially secure again. Not wealthy, but comfortable. More importantly, free. I'd enrolled in art classes at the community college, started painting again, picking up where I'd left off 40 years ago. My first piece, a watercolor of Lake Michigan at sunset, had sold at a student exhibition. The buyer said it made her feel peaceful. I joined a book club, made new friends who knew nothing about my legal battles or my family drama, women my age who'd lived full lives and had stories to tell. I'd started volunteering at a women's shelter, teaching basic financial literacy, helping other women recognize the signs of financial abuse before it was too late. And I'd planned that trip to Ireland Richard and I had always talked about, solo this time. I'd leave next week, spend a month wandering through villages and sitting in pubs and writing in the journal I'd started keeping. My grandchildren had reached out, some of them anyway. The older ones, who were adults now and understood what their parents had done. We were rebuilding relationships slowly, carefully. I'd made it clear I wouldn't be bankrolling their college or their weddings or their startup costs. But I'd be there for emotional support, for advice, for the kind of love that didn't come with dollar signs attached. My children I hadn't heard from since the criminal charges were filed. David took a plea deal, 5 years probation, restitution, community service. Melissa was still fighting. Thomas had fled to California and wasn't returning calls from his attorney. I didn't hate them. Hate required more energy than I was willing to give. I just felt nothing. Standing in my kitchen, I made tea in my violet cup. This time, I drank it. It tasted like Earl Grey and honey and freedom. I thought about Richard, about the love we'd had and the life we'd built, about how he'd tried to protect me even as he was dying, about the legacy he'd really left me, not money, but the courage to fight for myself. There's a phenomenon psychologists talk about called the sunk cost fallacy. The idea that we continue investing in something because of how much we've already invested, even when it's clearly not working. People stay in bad relationships because they've already given so many years. They keep pouring money into failing businesses because they've already lost so much. I'd been sunk cost fallacying my entire relationship with my children. I'd kept giving and forgiving and sacrificing because I'd already given so much. Because admitting they didn't deserve it meant admitting I'd wasted decades of devotion. But recognizing a mistake doesn't mean the time was wasted. It means you're finally smart enough to stop repeating it. I'd been a good mother. I'd loved them deeply and raised them with values and given them every opportunity. What they chose to do with that, the adults they chose to become, wasn't my failure. It was theirs, and I was done carrying their failures. The morning I left for Ireland, I did one last thing. I went to Richard's grave, sat beside his headstone, and told him everything. I did it, I said to the cold marble. I fought them. I won. Not because I got the money back, though I did, but because I got myself back. I told him about the art classes and the trip and the new friends. I told him I'd decided to write that children's book I'd always talked about. I told him I was happy, not in spite of everything that had happened, but somehow because of it. You were right, I said. They showed me who they really were, and I'm finally strong enough to believe it. At the airport, waiting for my flight to Dublin, I watched families reunite, saw children hugging elderly parents, helping them with luggage, laughing together. I wondered which of those relationships were genuine and which were performances. I wondered how many of those sweet children would turn into adults who saw their parents as assets to be managed. And then I stopped wondering, stopped projecting my experience onto others. Some families were real. Some children did love their parents without agenda. Mine just didn't, and that was sad, but it wasn't universal truth. The flight attendant checked my passport and ticket. Traveling alone? Yes. First time in Ireland? First time anywhere alone. First time in 40 years. She smiled. How exciting. You're going to have a wonderful adventure. And I did. So here's what I learned, and I hope someone out there needs to hear this. You are not obligated to sacrifice yourself for people who see you as disposable. Not even family. Especially not family. Because real family, the kind worth keeping, doesn't ask you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Real love doesn't need to be bought. It doesn't keep score. It doesn't wait until you're weak to strike. And if the people in your life only value you for what you can give them, they don't value you at all. They value your utility. You're just a resource to be extracted. Walking away from that, even when it's family, even when it feels like betraying everything you were taught about loyalty, isn't giving up. It's waking up. It's choosing yourself for the first time in your life. And that's not selfish. That's survival. I'm 70 years old now, living alone in a smaller house by the lake, painting every morning, writing in the afternoons, walking along the shore at sunset. I have enough money to live comfortably. I have friends who actually care about me. I have art on my walls that I created with my own hands. I don't have the family I thought I'd have in my old age. I don't have children who visit or grandchildren for Sunday dinners. I don't have anyone to call when something breaks or when I'm sick. But I have my dignity. I have my self-respect. I have peace. And some days, that feels like more than enough. Some days, it feels like everything. So if you're out there, living through something similar, feeling trapped by obligation or guilt or the sunk cost of decades of devotion, hear me. You are not crazy. You are not paranoid. You are not betraying family values by protecting yourself. You're just finally seeing clearly. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, you have a choice. Keep pretending. Keep sacrificing. Keep letting them drain you until there's nothing left. Or walk away. Rebuild. Reclaim the life you set aside. It won't be easy. People will judge you. The world loves to condemn women who aren't endlessly self-sacrificing. Your family will play victim, tell everyone you've abandoned them, paint you as selfish or cruel or mentally unstable. Let them. Their opinions stopped mattering the moment they decided you didn't. And to anyone who thinks I'm too harsh, too unforgiving, too willing to burn family bridges, you're right. I am. Because I spent 68 years building bridges to people who set them on fire the moment it benefited them. I'm done rebuilding for people who only know how to destroy. Now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt used by the people you loved most? Have you experienced anything like this? Or do you know someone who has? I'd really appreciate if you'd share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you in any way, please hit that like button and subscribe. There might be someone out there who needs to hear this message before it's too late. Maybe your share will be the wake-up call they need. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for letting me be honest about something most people don't want to talk about. Family dysfunction, elder abuse, the ugly truth behind closed doors. We don't talk about these things enough. And the silence protects the abusers while isolating the victims. So let's talk. Let's share. Let's break the silence together. Because somewhere out there, someone is sitting in their kitchen, making tea they can't drink, wondering if they're crazy for suspecting the people they love most are using them. They're not crazy. They're just finally seeing the truth. And the truth, as painful as it is, will set you free.